You were just talking about whiskey drinking, and I think Conservative strategists might have wanted a strong whiskey when they saw today's IPSOS polling. So IPSOS is one of the most established pollsters in the country, and they found today the Conservatives falling to 19%.
Yeah, below the 20-point mark.
Below the 20-point, but crucially the lowest that they've recorded in 45 years of polling. So it really is quite a bombshell poll from IPSOS. They actually had the Labour vote slightly down as well. So this wasn't Labour extending their lead, but obviously still well ahead. It was the Conservatives struggling and a jump again in that reform vote.
It is a wow moment, isn't it? Is there anything in the data that tells us precisely why they've gone through, if we call 20% the floor, they've gone through the floor?
Well, one of the really interesting things looking at is if you look at the under 35s. Now, we know, the Conservatives traditionally don't do that well with young people, but they've always had a bit of a base. In this poll, they're on 7% of under 35s. And of course, that will worry the Conservatives not just for this election, but for future elections as well, because they need that group to keep on voting. Slightly better news from YouGov today. They were back above the 20-point mark with YouGov on 21%. So it wasn't all bad news. But I think just because that Ipsos poll has been so long running, I think that's what will worry people. And it was interesting that Sunak's personal ratings also taking another hit now. He's now the most unpopular party prime minister that they've recorded, on a par with John Major's minus 59.
I want to come back to that because that's another pretty powerful finding. But on the question of age, I saw some polling numbers which discuss the crossover point where you're more likely to be a Tory depending on your age, and that's now up to 70. You're more likely to be a Tory after the age of 70. And back at the time of Boris Johnson's election, it was, 39?
Yeah, it was just under 40. So this was some analysis by JL Partners, which found, it's not just retirement age at which you start voting Tory now, it's actually beyond it. And again, that poses questions for the future, because you're not just losing, the very young, you're losing all working age people pretty much.
Well, it helps to explain the adherence to the triple lot when it comes to the pension pledge. And what about Rishi Sunak? I mean, those numbers for his popularity rating, again, the lowest that we can see, is down there with anything we've ever seen before, down there with Truss, below Boris Johnson. Unlike those, of course, Liz Truss gave us the calamitous budget, and Boris Johnson gave us Partygate and all sorts of other problems, but Rishi Sunak, what's he done to earn that?
I think the thing with Rishi Sunak, when you talk to people in the focus groups, it's been a sort of steady erosion. There were sort of higher hopes for him when he came in. People would say, we're worried he's a bit too wealthy to get it, but he's quite competent, isn't he? And they really liked him as Chancellor. And I think as time has gone on and he hasn't been seen to get a grip on his party, to turn the economy around quick enough, it's flipped not just from he's out of touch to more people saying, he's a bit invisible, isn't he? He's a bit weak. He's not turned things round. And so I think that's what's damaged him. Unlike the other two, not one big event, just a steady erosion of faith in Rishi Sunak.
Right, let's talk about the story that's been, among one or two others, dominant this week, the story of so-called sleaze, the conduct of individual MPs, the Conservative Party going all out after Angela Rayner over her past tax affairs and living arrangements. Today we've got the story of the MP who's accused of various kinds of misconduct. Any sign of how that's playing with the public? I saw a YouGov poll that said when it came to Angela Rayner, only about 25 people were even aware.
Yeah, it was 25% were following the story closely. And I think, part of the thing with these sleaze, corruption, whatever you want to call them, type stories, is the public have kind of become inured to them. There's a bit of a feeling it's sort of a pox on all your houses. Well, of course, they've got their hand in the till. We did a focus group this week and they were like, the two people at the top do it. They did it over lockdown. So why wouldn't everyone else as well? So one thing that's really struck me, particularly in focus groups this year, is how cynical people are about politicians.
Yes.
They're always cynical in general, but I think particularly at the moment, there's a real sense that they don't think people are in public service for the right reasons.
Yeah, so in one sense, maybe the sort of, the disillusionment or outrage at a particular scandal is being outweighed by the fact that nobody rates anyone in politics, which is also a pretty depressing thought. And Michael Heseltine, who I was talking to here on Drive just a short while ago, he insisted that this stuff doesn't matter, but maybe it doesn't have a huge direct effect on opinion polls or the fortunes of the party, but it does have an effect in a broader sense, doesn't it? Because a story that runs and runs and runs crowds out other stories that might be less helpful to a particular party.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the challenges for the Labour Party with the Rayner story, and you can question the faith of the people who are making the attacks. I know you can say, it's quite a minor matter. It's the fact that it stops them from getting their message out, which I think is the most damaging. Ditto, Rishi Sunak and the Tories wanted to be talking about inflation today, and instead they're talking about the Mark Menzies affair. It does seem like every time the government get a bit of good news, it's drowned out by something happening with one of their MPs.
Now, Luke, there's been some polling on who people think a particular party represents best. Let's just take us through it.
Yeah, so we did some polling looking at a series of different groups in society. So everything from working class people, pensioners, students, through to the rich. And we asked whether Labour or the Conservatives best represent them. And the really interesting was almost every group, Labour was ahead in, including pensioners. Actually, which is quite significant given the Tory vote, and the Tories only leading amongst the rich and the middle class in that, which again is, I think, a reflection of their poll rating. More interestingly, we asked which areas of the country the parties represent. And what was really interesting in that is, given the Conservatives have been so strong in their anti-London rhetoric, they've even used it as a campaigning technique elsewhere. London was one of the few regions that people said was better represented by the Conservatives than Labour. They felt the Conservatives represented London and the South, and Labour represented the North, Midlands and the nations.
Yes. And what about on issues, the issues that people think about out there? Today's Daily Mail, I think it splashes on the story that Labour's ahead on everything, including Brexit. And they make the point right after that people don't want a Labour government. But it's hard to argue people don't want a Labour government when they're 21 and 22 points ahead. But I think they're make the point of a lack of burning enthusiasm.
Yeah, and the interesting thing going back to those leader ratings is, they are pretty dire for Rishi Sunak. But actually, you look at Keir Starmer, and his approval is underwater. It's minus 31. Roughly the same level that Ed Miliband and Michael Howard were at when they were leader of the opposition. So it does seem still that the mood in the country is it's time for change. It's time to give Labour a shot, but not with much enthusiasm.
Right,